this centralized money interest to shareholders of central banks, it can only exist to the extent that the elevation of human consciousness is suppressed.
Yes.
Because if people understand, Kelly said it at the end of that video. There's a famous Henry Ford quote, right? If America understood the banking system, there'd be a revolution before tomorrow morning. This whole dark game requires the darkness, right? It requires the opacity, the obfuscation, the rewriting of the history, the lack of of keeping all of these things unconscious. If they become conscious, then people will refuse them. They will rebel against it. They'll have a revolution.
Like you said, rebellion against tyrants is obedience to God.
Yes.
And that's in it. You don't have to agree on the deity, right?
Yeah.
It's just natural law,
yeah.
right? Property rights are inherent to freedom and vice versa,
yeah.
right? And then to the game part, as the soundness and hardness of money is decayed, that is correlated with the values of society.
Yes.
And that's not tangential, that's purposeful.
Right.
Because as you debaucherize a society, I'm pretty sure I made up that word.
That's a good word, though.
You only can do that when the money is just a form of debauchery in and of itself. And if people are listening to us and go, oh, what the hell, you guys sound crazy. No, look, you've already sent your dollars, hundreds of billions, just in the last few years, to wars no one voted for, you don't support, to invade the country, and to pay for things that aren't our own people, aren't our own sovereign border, and aren't the health and wealth and sustainability of our country. Literally, if you do an old school bond ladder of Social Security, this is how the math can work: 2s, 5s, 10s, and 30s. And assuming everybody pays in roughly 600 grand, by the time you get to 65 at a 4% return, that is plenty of money, 6 figures for people to live off of, with millions of principal. You could then assign to your next generation and let it compound again until their age of retirement, 62 and a half, 65, whatever it is. And we make every single human being in America prosperous instantaneously.
Yeah.
But that's not what they want.
But you can't do that because the goods that money represents are actually being used to wage war, right?
Well, and also assuming that money is hard money and backed by...
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. The money...
But I'm saying, I'm pointing out the solves that are so simple once money is sound and hard.
That's right. Yeah, all we're saying with hard money is money that does not steal from you.
Correct.
Right? It cannot be printed to siphon away your purchasing power.
Or your time preference.
Or your time to go and wage war or fund propaganda, fund psyops, fund all of this nonsense, right? And this is that almost spiritual connection that we're always trying to tease out in these conversations, is that the integrity of the money supply it closely parallels the moral integrity of the society that uses it.
Right. And John Adams correctly said, a republic if you can keep it, right? To the woman who asked him after they signed everything. And it is what it is. Like, this may just be, the Matrix, and we're going to, reap what we sow here. But I think it's hard to appraise a situation without understanding there's been a specific and directed interest to confiscate property rights, to debaucherize money, and to render a population unconscious, largely useless to themselves, and not have the skill set or the awareness to combat it legally, spiritually, and or physically.
Yeah.
And that's why we are extraordinarily lucky for this. And that
you're indicating to your Satoshi shirt with a big happy face with 2 B's for eyes. We are lucky that Satoshi did what? Gave us an alternative to this.
That unselfishly, and I do want to read that Andrew Jackson quote.
Yes, we will read it in its full. But we're not going to skip ahead yet. But I just want to hear one comment on Satoshi. I know we're jumping ahead, but
yeah. So to me, one of the most beautiful things, separate the economic system built on Bitcoin's blockchain, right? The rules of it are unbelievable. So one thing that I think resonates with me on the spiritual or metaphysical realm is that you don't know who, what, how, when, why. And let's say it was one, I believe it was more than one. It was a consortium of folks, the cypherpunks, yada, 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 that would include a few names that I know you know, just unleashed it to humanity, much like think you're George Washington. You have the love and sword of every man in the 13 colonies after that war. They wanted to make him king. And then he said, no, we just fought against a king. Yeah. And then, okay, we want you president. No, I don't want to be president. I want to go home and farm and be with my wife and grandkids. You know, that's so what you want, as any man would want. And it was through his disinterestedness that made him the best leader, I think, in American history. But given the power he had at that moment, he could have been Charlemagne. Right? Everything in America's mind. And we would have an entirely different history on the whims of one man. And that's an incredibly harsh reality to understand.
That was obedience to God right there. Right? That this man's deep. We actually don't give him enough credit.
No, we really don't.
Often hear of Marcus Aurelius cited as the only living philosopher king. The only philosopher king that ever lived. But I would say, to your point, you could put George Washington in that category, right? He had the keys to the kingdom in his hand, and all he had to do was say yes.
When Marcus Aurelius came to power, Caesar's already set it up for him. Right? The battles have already been fought to expand the Roman Empire. I'm not diminishing the stoic quality of Marcus
But George
Aurelius.
Washington fought the battles.
Washington fought him and won, and arguably by rules of old, this is your land.
King.
And his bloodline would have been our. We would have whatever great grandson is our king now, and we would all be obedient because he won us the land. And it's really looked over. I honestly think, not to be too much of a skeptic, it's on purpose. People at the top that wield the PSYOP warfare through the media at all, they do not want you to pay homage to the great sacrifice that many men and women made to make this country free for everybody. So you just jack off on your fucking phone all the time. We really do them such dishonor with how much we waste our time.
Amen to that. That is honestly worth paying more reverence toward the fact that level of temptation for a man to have that much power that he earned even, right? He has every right, more or less, like as you said, based on the rules of old, to say, yeah, I won this battle. I won this war. Time to plant my flag, my name, my lineage, my history. But he stayed true to the principles and the ideals on which this constitutional republic fought to achieve, which was decentralization, checks and balances, habeas, all those things, right, that flowed out of the Christian tradition ultimately.
Due process.
Due process, common law.
Property rights.
That's interesting. We need to talk more about old George Washington.
It almost is worth going back to the 1776 period leading up to that. But I think the point is that awareness is being kept from people. Just as the details of what we're going over. And if we want to read the Jackson quote,
before that though, because Andrew Jackson follows in the spiritual legacy of Washington, right? This is a committed man to both a Christian man, but also committed to the principles on which the constitutional republic is founded. Now, he is also notoriously resistant to the central bank. He has a lot of quotes, one of which we'll read here. But before we talk about that, so Andrew Jackson is elected in 1828, right? And he was arguing the Constitution did not grant authority to Congress to create the central bank. He was elected on that.
So he was a famous general, right, from the War of 1812.
The American Lion.
Right? And so he fought in the Second Revolutionary War, largely, had mad respect, to use a 90s term, of all of the people. And then his slogans were that of being against the central bank and saying, it's not, our Constitution would never allow this. Elect me, I'm going to get rid of the bank. That was it. And then it's really fascinating to find the counterpoints to that, especially after he vetoed, because they just went after him 3 ways from Sunday. And it literally got to the point where they're verbally threatening, like they are now. Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. And I'm not commenting on the merits or lack thereof of any candidate. I'm just commenting on the propaganda and where it originates from.
Yes.
It is always using fear, it's threats, and this negative frequency to take down your consciousness, to get you to have fight or flight response so that you can't make a good learned decision.
Amen. Yeah, these are men that were fighting for the elevation of human consciousness in a real way. And not only fighting for it, but exemplifying it and embodying it, as you said with George Washington, refusing to be king, right? He is living his philosophy at that point. It's more than just talk and words on paper. He's demonstrating it through action. And then Jackson also was challenging the constitutionality of the central bank. Well, I guess on both constitutional grounds and philosophical grounds.
Yeah.
So
he ran on the constitutional, but he challenged it philosophically.
yes,
And that's why, like this, I know it's a long-winded quote.
it's a long quote, but I will read it in honor of this great man. So he said, "It is to be regretted that the rich and powerful too often bend the acts of government to their selfish purposes. Distinctions in society will always exist under every just government. Equality of talents, of education, or of wealth cannot be produced by human institutions. In the full enjoyment of the gifts of heaven and the fruits of superior industry, economy, and virtue, every man is equally entitled to protection by law. But when the laws undertake to add to these natural and just advantages artificial distinctions, to grant titles, gratuities, and exclusive privileges, to make the rich richer and the potent more powerful, the humble members of society, the farmers, mechanics, and laborers, who have neither the time nor the means of securing like favors to themselves, have a right to complain of the injustice of their government. There are no necessary evils in government. Its evils exist only in its abuses. If it would confine itself to equal protection and, as heaven does, it rains, shower its favors alike on the high and the low, the rich and the poor, it would be an unqualified blessing. In the act before me, there seems to be a wide and unnecessary departure from these just principles."
I mean, so that's like biblical level writing. He said that in 1832.
Yeah.
Does it not resonate right this moment with the wealth divide larger than ever in history?
Back to the game thing, right?
Yeah.
For me, it's this. He compares it to heaven, right? That it rains and showers its favors alike on the high and the low, the rich and the poor. Looking for that set of immutable rules that are universally applicable and inviolable for all human beings. Ultimately, the rule of law, but it grounds out in private property, right? Like, how do we perfect private property for the whole, in this case, of the nation, but ideally, I would say probably of the human race, and if he's getting into his Christian views. And, well, I mean, I would say this is an excellent argument for Bitcoin, too. He's basically predicting it in a way.
He's predicting it in 1832.
Yeah.
Because Andrew, General Jackson, you're conscious of what one, if not the only and main problem is the money-centered interest of the protected class, right? Okay, well, they didn't know yet the means with which to solve for that, right? Because even under gold standard, you still had these asset forfeitures, asset seizures, collateral seizures, property rights violated, all related to away from specie, which is technically the silver and gold backing of the notes and the currency. That it's still anchored to gold. It wasn't able to protect people from its misuse, and not the misuse of gold, misuse of money. Yes.
So there's a story too. I don't know if you know about this one, and it may be apocryphal, but didn't he punch a central banker in the face at one of these meetings?
Yeah, I mean, the name is in there. Tiddly. Forget the name. I don't want to misspeak, but it is reported that he did punch one of them. And then when he died saying, "I got you," bankers, basically.
Yeah.
And that's like, we need to, or at least I revel in the ability to rehash, reread, and re-enjoy the strength of these great figures throughout American history, because you have countless Cubans that have come to this city where we're sitting right now in Miami, where they'll tell their stories of stuff being taken from them, but then they'll also tell you stories of, at least I had a place to come to.
Yeah.
And we are now sitting here in 2024 with the West being debauched. Largely what the Treaty of Versailles did to Berlin has now been done across the West. And we're sitting where the dollar has lost 99.83% of its value since 1913. BRICS currencies are probably going to fail also, but challenge the supremacy of the dollar now, making us all poorer instantaneously. And we have proxy wars looking like they're going to turn into world wars, very similar to the Bolshevik Revolution beginning in the period right when the Federal Reserve started, and what happened 1 year after the Federal Reserve Act was signed, World War I. So these things are not only just correlated, this is caused and planned out by these certain things to be able to occur. Oh, well, now that we own all the money printing for the United States, we're going to World War. We're going to make a fortune.
Yeah.
It's obviously way more nefarious than that, but at that level, it's really easy to understand.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you've afforded yourself the means of unlimited war financing, and then you can use war to confiscate more things and establish new tax bases and establish new central banks for that matter.
Notice the ones they're most mad at don't have their central banks.
Yes, that is exactly the one. Yes, the wars that are being waged right now in the Middle East, right?
And Russia.
In Russia. So there are very few central banks in the world that are not controlled by this interest. And those are the ones that we are warring against. I shouldn't say we, that are being warred against by these interests.
And Bukele took his back for his people. It's now a public central bank owned by the people.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to appraise that for what it is, and then understand what's coming by us explaining the specifics of the Panic of 1907. So at the time, so let me back up. The process with which central bankers use a bending of the law and the money printing power is to stifle competition while confiscating wealth and assets, right? They don't want to do one or the other. They want to do both at the same time. So at this time, immediately after the Second Bank of the United States was vetoed from having a new charter, you had roughly 15,000 state banks, complete decentralization, pop up. There was quite a bit of issue of credit right after the small panic, right after Jackson got elected, that was originated by these folks. And you had massive expansion west, lending for this is the beginning of the industrial rage within the planet. And so you had a lot of credit creation, a lot of completely decentralized banks, autonomous from the money centers in, at the time, Massachusetts and New York City. And then what they did to set up sort of like an intermediary bank between local banks and effectively Wall Street was set up trusts. So the Panic of 1907 centers around a famous case study of the Knickerbocker Trust. And effectively what happened was there was a few speculators on stock. This is the narrative, by the way, guys, that used Union Pacific stock as collateral for bets on other equities. And this occurred from the trusts to the national money center banks, and it largely the iteration was Citigroup. It wasn't named that then, but this is Citigroup. And they created a overnight lending market similar to reverse repo with the Fed, and it was called broker call loans. And the trust would use stock collateral of the constituents to give out loans for equity speculation, essentially. Well, what happened? They being the money center banks, utilized a correction in stock to call collateral. They raised the interest rate October 22nd, 1907. I think the chart is on the notes, to 100% overnight rate.
Wow.
Okay, so back up. If we raise rates to 100% overnight, we understand we're not getting that. We're literally bankrupting someone else real time.
Yeah, that's like what, 36,400% a year or something?
Yeah, I mean, multiply by 365.
365, yeah.
So,
wow.
So let's all, okay, so I just diatribed for a minute there. Let's understand.
So that's just confiscating the collateral, basically.
literally just saying, "Oh, here's how we're
which
going
is
to
violating the contract.
Correct.
Which is violating private property.
Well, and we had, I'm not one for regulation. But there was no checks and balances to the people arbitrarily just making this up as they go along.
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, so this happened. We're going to do this. And in reaction, sorry, we're confiscating it. And the reality is they didn't want the trusts to compete, right? Ultimately, they didn't want the state banks to compete. And we will do this another time where we go over the savings and loan crisis of late 80s into 90s, where these state banks, community banks, where they start bankrupting all of them on purpose with a small legal change.
Right.
So it's always under the auspices of, oh, look, interest rates went up and yada, yada, yada. We had the right to go get our collateral, right? Fast forward to Lehman, the creditors of that didn't even get any cents in the dollar back till 6 years later, right? Like, so all of this is complete buffoonery and chicanery, to quote Mr. Bloom. And people don't understand this is happening to them all day, every day, right underneath their nose.
Yes. Well, that is why we are here, hopefully, is to make some of this unconscious stuff more conscious. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money, and be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.